Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Leaders with Purpose. I'm Rebecca Hull, I'm Managing Director at Manifesto, and today we're joined by Afsana Lachaux, who is Director of the Sweaty Betty Foundation.
And I'm Lou Lai, Chief Client and Transformation Officer at Manifesto. And in today's episode, we have a really raw and honest conversation with our amazing guest. We reclaim the power of being labelled a troublemaker for good, so actually tackling systemic structural challenges for true impact. We talk about a really exciting new campaign, Change Happens in the Changing Room, which is a girl-led, user-centred campaign that really looks to tackle challenges. We touch upon reverse mentoring, so how can we readdress some of the skills gaps or challenges that leaders may be facing right now in the not-for-profit sector and beyond. So tune in.
I'd really like to welcome you, Afsana, to today's session. You are Director of the Sweaty Betty Foundation. Enormous amount of really interesting perspectives and experience. Feel very lucky that we've got you here today. So welcome. And maybe let's start by you telling us a little bit about your leadership journey to date.
Well, thank you very much, Lou, Rebecca, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I get to talk about myself for the next hour or so. What's not to like? Yes, so I've been actually told most of my life that I'm a troublemaker. And it probably become quite apparent why. And that's because I've spent the last 3 decades actually trying to be not so much disruptive, but trying to solve actually quite complex problems, which often have, caused and created issues for people who should be solving those problems. And so I started my career in local government at a time not dissimilar to now, what we're experiencing. I was headhunted to set up a task force in East London for Tower Hamlets Council, a hate crime task force, because at that time in the early 90s, Tower Hamlets had the worst hate crime. People were actually being firebombed in their houses. So quite a really nasty and horrible time of social unrest. And so I set up this task force for the council. And actually what was quite, I think for me, what really brought it home is that the council, previously the task force, had been dealing with this issue where a lot of families, like I said, were being attacked, dogs being set upon neighbours. I mean, you can imagine how bad that was. And so working with the police, although it had its challenges, my job was to put together this task force where we would take people who perpetrated these crimes to court. And we did that, and we were the first council in the country to actually take perpetrators to court for race hate crime, but also domestic violence. So some of that sort of gets lost now, but now it's become a standard way of working. So I'm really proud of that. And that's really been a theme throughout my career, actually, is really dealing with complex problems and trying to come up with solutions by working together. And, inequality and injustice has really defined my life and my career. I grew up, in the 70s, again, facing a lot of racism. And my parents were immigrants from Bangladesh and had settled here and, wanted to put life together. So that has defined my career in public service. And I spent first part of my, I would say, good decade in local government. Then I moved to central government. I had the great honour, and it is an honour, to work under Gordon Brown's leadership when he was in government. And another task force to look at inequalities in terms of labour market inequalities. And they're a huge privilege to work on some really big scale policies to try and deal with narrowing the unemployment gap between disadvantaged groups of individuals and the rest of the population. So super proud. I did the first work on ethnic pay penalty. So we look at gender pay penalty. The first bit of work that I did was on ethnic pay penalty, which is now part of the government's New Deal for Work. And I flipped my career a few years back and worked in the charity sector. I was told by a headhunter, no one goes and works from central government into the charity sector. That's just for, you know, that phrase when people say the people that can't teach are you're made to feel useless. So I took this amazing role with the Prince's Trust and really, got a passion for working with young people. And that's brought me to the role here at Sweaty Betty, where I get to listen to girls and work with young women and girls every day. And it just gives me enormous joy to work in that sector.
Amazing. And I think some of the sort of experience you shared was around like seeing the impact and the stories firsthand as someone who started as a volunteer youth worker 20 odd years ago. And that is what drew me into the sector, like seeing the impact that you could have for young people, knowing that when you don't have a good footing in life, like it's really difficult to kind of then progress and get access to opportunities. And so I guess being exposed to kind of firsthand, like seeing the services, the work being done and the work with kind of Sweaty Betty Foundation, what impact has that had on you?
Well, I've always thought that phrase, and that's why we have our big campaign at the moment, which I won't stop talking about, which is listen to girls, listen to her. So our big campaign is listen to her. And it's really simple. The reason why we say that, because I don't think we do enough listening. You look at what's happening in the moment. Everyone, there's a lot of problems and conflict and very polarized. But I do think that the answer and solution does lie in actually listening to communities, listening to young people, letting people have a voice and a say. You might not like everything that they say, things might not be, you might not be able to implement everything. But I think what we're not doing is really having meaningful engagement. And what does that look like? And then being honest as well. I think honesty and being open and having a level of integrity is really important, particularly when you are working with young people. We all know what happens when you might be saying you're a purposeful brand or a charity, and then you make an intention to do something, but people might perceive that as to be performative. And the first people that will see that is young people. They will see right through it.
Yeah, we've been working with some sort of fellow agencies in the space and around, exactly trying to bust the myths around Gen Z and that younger generation, and actually their values, integrity are, much more deeper than they're often given credit for. And they are the first ones to smell fake news or
And with that sort of, I guess you're talking about authenticity, right? And like integrity and a value, like how do those, like, are those values shared within the organisation right now? Like how have they been sort of brought through in the new campaign in terms of like living the values and being true to actually advocating for girls and giving them a platform?
So, so one of the challenges that I started at the foundation 2 years ago. It's a very young foundation. It's almost like I'd like to think of it, and I think my chair as well, like a startup. So we've only been going for 4 years. So still a lot to do. And the charity's main aim and the problem, and I go back to what is it that we're trying to solve, is this issue that there are a lot of girls out there who don't have opportunities to be active, and it's impacting on their mental and physical health. And what can we do as in the sector, as a small charity, what can we do to break those barriers down? So for us, and what I was looking at is, well, actually, we know what the barriers are, that a lot of girls, as soon as they turn, into secondary school and that adolescent, you've got 1 million plus girls who are actually turning off sport and physical exercise. That's a lot of girls. Yeah. And for the least active, particularly in the areas which we deem as disadvantaged, it's much more profound. So you have girls who are from Black and South Asian backgrounds not doing enough. I'm South Asian myself. When I was at school, my parents wanted me to be a doctor and a dentist or an engineer or a lawyer. And so physical activity for me, it wasn't prioritized. And the same we can see in those communities. So in terms of what we've been doing, again, we've been working with community groups. We've been talking to girls themselves and listening. And they've told us that with the current campaign we have at the moment is focused on giving them confidence, for example, to change their spaces in their changing rooms, because that's a big barrier. We all know that as soon as puberty comes on, body shaming and how girls look, it's a big factor. And so what we've been trying to do is empower them to have the solution. It's not about us as a charity coming to them with solutions. It's about saying, okay, this is the problem. You don't like the changing rooms. We know they're smelly. They've been like that for 30 odd years. What do you want to do? And what the girls have come back with has been absolutely amazing. I mean, even little things like mirrors give us confidence. Why have the mirrors been taken out of schools? Things you wouldn't think of because we're looking at it from an adult lens. We need to look at it through the lens of girls. And that's what I would say our USP is within the foundation, is that having girls-led design, empowering them and not being afraid to actually get it wrong.
Yeah. And I guess so part of your sort of integrity is then owning that, being open with it, and kind of them, I guess, the girls being on the journey with you and kind of knowing that you're like actually your mission, like your intentions are positive and you might not get it right, and you're an organisation also in yourself, you're on your learning journey as being 4 years old, like actually is quite sort of young for a foundation. And so how receptive are the girls to like the openness from the foundation, and also how familiar are they with Sweaty Betty as a brand and the role that it can play?
Interesting, a great question. So when I've gone around the country, I visit hundreds, well, I say 100 schools, but a lot of schools. And you have to remember these are sort of, most of these schools are in areas of what I would say high levels of deprivation. So their awareness of certain brands, so with Sweaty Betty, they may not be necessarily aware of the brand, but they will be aware, in fact, painfully aware of the fact that they can't do exercise and can't be active, for example, because the kit isn't right. So one of the things we did, and with our help from Sweaty Betty, is we've recrafted and designed a sports hijab. So every year we give away 300 sports hijabs to girls across the UK so they can do sports. So you have Muslim girls who are doing football for the first time. And I'm not saying that to advertise, so don't get me wrong. This is not an advert for Sweaty Betty, but the reason I'm saying it is one of these things that define my career and how I look at leadership is sometimes the solutions are not that complicated. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the solutions are not about money and big government papers and policies. Sometimes the solutions can be very simple, and they often lie with the person or groups that you're trying to help.
I'm going to do one final click, and then we're going to talk about excellence, because that is something that shone through and we were really keen on, is around like actually funding into sports programs when there's been a huge amount of positive PR around women in sport, that being a career that can actually sustain them financially, which has not always been the case. And so is part of the work that you do within sort of the foundation also around kind of like increasing funding into sort of women's sports, kind of funding into programs that are kind of encouraging women to actually enter these spaces and access them?
So again, I mean, everyone knows funding is a big issue in the charity sector, and it's great to see after the Lionesses win. I mean, there's been some amazing announcements and development, and all that's good. And I don't want to be doom and gloom here, but I am going to take a moment to be doom and gloom. What's happening in the sector at the moment, particularly around sports, is a lot of money is going, but it's going into traditional sports. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, what makes us a bit sort of stand outside of that and unique. Girls tell us, and actually it's a very important point, is a lot of sports and PE curriculum, it's very technical. I mean, you must remember the time you were at school, the whistle blows, you're doing netball. I mean, now kids get to play football. But it's all very team sports related. And what we want is we want girls and women to experience the joy of movement. So what about dance and yoga? We'd love to have yoga, breathing sessions in schools, mindfulness. I know I probably not get the sack, but people think I'm wacky for even suggesting that. But those are the things that, in terms of the foundation work, is when we look at what's having an impact and investment, is to look at the whole range of things that could define movement. So it's great that government and others are investing in sports, but is that reaching everyone? Yeah. And is that catering to everyone's needs?
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's sort of those who know me will know that I have 2 teenage daughters who, as young children were very movement oriented and got so much pleasure from it. And it really was a source of kind of sadness for me that at the same age that you talked about, that it started to drop off. So it did a lot of gymnastics and dance and just generally out in the world, running, moving. And the reason that that happened was mainly because they didn't want to compete. Yeah. And the only avenue for sport is you must compete. And it's often a very toxic culture, yes, particularly in those more expressive forms of movement. And I think when we look at, for me, there are so many kind of circles and loops and connected themes in your threads. To go back to, your reference around domestic violence, if we're to give like women a voice for them to be empowered and comfortable in their bodies and to know, how do I express consent? How do I know what's good for me, what's not good for me? They've got to start to feel that in an embodied way. And if you're not moving, you can't. If you're not connecting with yourself in your body, you're not having that experience. And so that ability to run, do yoga, dance, do a little TikTok with your friends actually pays dividends in 10 years' time, because all of this feedback between your nervous system and your brain is already starting to lay really good pathways. So what I love about what you've described you do at Sweaty Betty is that in a world where there are so many issues to tackle, that you've really honed in on these are spaces that we can make a really tangible difference. And, I imagine that feels an enabler in terms of momentum, and I know it's difficult to prioritize all these things that we'd like to do. Is that something that you have to go through as sort of a team and an organization? Is like, how do you focus on this is the thing where we can make the most difference?
Yeah, it's very challenging. Again, it's very challenging for a lot of charities and businesses because you have a finite pot of money and funding, and this thing is how do you drive impact? Where do you have impact? And again, it's really I try and bring it back down to what's the problem that we're trying to solve. What resources do you have? I have a very, very lean team, and often people say to me they thought the team was 15, 20 people and we've got huge marketing budgets. No, I have 0 for marketing. We do our own marketing. So there's 3 things there that to unpack. One is you have to be very agile. And I think for me, one of the learning lessons, we spoke about it earlier actually, is that you can never stop learning. I mean, when I started out my career, there was no TikTok or Instagram or anything like that, or even LinkedIn was just in the early days. So you are never too old to learn. I don't do TikTok or Instagram, but, I'm not averse to doing the odd funny video just to, get Gen Z going. So you're never too old to learn and you have to adapt. So I would say one of the things about being in this space, or any leader actually, is your adaptability. In my career, I've worked, as senior civil servant, I've worked in the corporate sector, and now I work in the charity sector. And each time, it's almost like a chameleon. I've had to adapt. And sometimes that's gone against me. When I've gone for certain jobs, people have said, oh, actually, you're not an expert in this, or you haven't been in this sector for very long. And I said, well, what about the last 30 years and what I've done there? And I think people, particularly now with the world of work and AI changing, you have to be adaptable. You have to be agile. And the leaders, I'm not saying I'm the best leader. I'm always on a learning curve. There's so much that I've learned in the last few years, particularly, again, I go back to listening to girls, but also from teams. People bring in all sorts of things to the mix. And for me, that's my fuel, is having that collaborative with people come with energies and ideas and be a disruptor. Don't settle for the same old way we've done something.
Yeah. When you talk about kind of like always curious to learn, so one of the things that I would say, Rebecca, as a leader, you're really good at helping people see what they're bringing to the table, but then in being conscious of yourself, you're then also conscious of, okay, so where's my gaps, where this person isn't competing with me, this person is complementing my skills. Like how is that sort of showing up in your team, and kind of, the type of skills that you are sort of recruiting or the capabilities you're building?
Yeah. And again, another sort of great question. It gets me to think, actually. What I love I have, like I said, a very small team. And yes, it's women. Someone asked me, didn't you recruit any men? And it's really difficult. Yes, we can, I guess. But at the moment, a lot of work we do is around girls, and girls feel comfortable around other sort of, female leaders and the workforce who understands their needs. So my key mantra to my team is it's all about autonomy and giving them the freedom and independence to create. I have one staff member who is works remotely, and she has 2 small children, and it's really sweet. Sometimes she says, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I've got to take so and so to school. Can I take this time off?" And I'm like, "No, absolutely. That is not. I know you're going to do the job. I don't care when you do it. As long as you have regard for your own sort of physical and emotional health." But that kind of culture where we used to have 20, 30 years ago, and I won't repeat, where, if you didn't work certain hours, and how people behaved in the workplace was very different to how you operate now. So I think giving people the confidence and the autonomy to lead, and also to believe in themselves to do it. I know sometimes my team will come to me like, "Can you have a look at this campaign?" We were sitting yesterday looking at some things for social media, and I thought, yeah, I really like it, but I also like the fact that you could actually go away and lead on this and welcome your ideas. And it won't be perfect. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. Giving people, I don't like using that word permission, because it's not about permission, just giving people confidence. We should all give confidence to each other every day.
Yeah, I really like that angle. We talk a lot in our business about sort of accountability, and I think that there's some words. I mean, they're not necessarily corporate words, but they've been embedded into kind of corporate, and I think they're really hard. I mean, I've used it a lot. We're really on a quite a strong narrative around accountability. What does that mean? Why is it different from responsibility? But I think a lot of language gets in the way with people really connecting, like at the heart of what you're trying to do. What is it? I want you to feel confident, safe to go away and do your best job. In an environment that's rapidly changing, there is no perfection. Don't let that be your barrier to progress. One of the impressions that I have, and it may be a very incorrect read, so forgive me if I'm making an assumption, but having looked at sort of your career and connected with you a little bit, I have a really strong sense of you being this incredible sort of synergist of like strategy, direction of travel. I know what I need to do, but that only becomes a thing if you execute well. Yeah. And I imagine that your brain goes really fast, and that there's a sort of a built-in impatience. I don't know
how you picked that up. Did you know me?
Troublemaker, disruptive, innovation.
How do you temper that within yourself? Yeah. Because it's something that Lou and I talk about a lot. It's like, faster, more, please. Yeah.
That's a pretty accurate reflection. How did you pick that up? That's why I opened up and said, a lot of people call me trouble. And I hate and love that term, but I've learned to wear it as almost a badge of honor. I used to hate it. It's like when people call me, I'm very small. I'm like, oh, here's a small person, petite. And I used to hate it, but now I embrace it and I see it as a strength. I'm a very driven person, which sometimes gets on my nerves, and I've had bouts of mental health issues. It's not something I feel comfortable talking about. I feel comfortable talking about it with you today, but I think it's, if we're going to be raw and honest. So, of course, I always say I don't suffer from imposter syndrome. It's not that I don't suffer from it. I don't allow myself to suffer from imposter syndrome, particularly being a woman of colour. Most of my life, I would say, I've always been underestimated by people, partly the way I look, size. I remember, many years ago when I was a director of housing and I entered this meeting and all the construction architects and people, they looked at me and thought I was the T person. And I said, no, I'm actually the director. And you could see their faces just drop. And even in the meeting, I still had to deal with all these invisible barriers to how do I make myself appear credible and authoritative. And I've had that all my life. Even now, I still get that. But what I do, I guess, is I have various coping mechanisms. So to deal with that fast, I do consider myself a dynamic person. Part of leaving the civil service was I was frustrated with bureaucracy. It was a great role. You get to change people's lives. That just gives me a kick. But the flip side of that, it takes forever to get something done. And I like to get things done. Sometimes I get frustrated when other people can't see what I can see. But you always have to check back in yourself and have due care for each other. And you don't learn that overnight. I've learned that over time. How do you become a better leader? How do you become a better listener? How do you respect people more? And I think it's always a self-reflection thing. None of us like criticism, right? But if criticism comes with good intentions, then that's fine. It's when criticism comes from a different place. And I know we might pick this up later, but again, I go back to being particularly South Asian or a woman of colour. I mean, I deal with this a lot, the statistics, something I advocate about, quite horrific still, that from the work that I did 20 years ago in government, you still have not very representative teams and leaders, and that's a problem.
I wanted to say actually welcome to the Difficult Women Club. And I saw this really beautiful quote by Jane Goodall last week. She said something like, it doesn't take very much to be considered a difficult woman. That's why there's so many of us. And
Love that.
I really like your sense of like owning. You may choose to give me this label, but I will make a choice myself as to how I live it, and I will kind of harness the intrinsic energy into troublemaking, into something that has an outcome
and not a negative. I think to your point, it's spinning something that could be perceived as a negative connotation into this is a positive outcome for me. Then if being a troublemaker means we're affecting systemic change in 10 years time, label away. I'm happy. I would rather be that than, apathy for not saying the thing that needs to be said. And I think that sort of purpose and mission is definitely something we share, and why we do what we do, why we've always done that, is like, what are we actually trying to achieve here? And even to your point around your team, it's like, what I care about is the outcome you're delivering, how you get there, when you do it on your time, as long as the outcome is with our mission and what we're trying to do. Again, that sense of safety and autonomy, actually it comes with responsibility. So as long as we do both, then actually we're in a safe space. With your, the learning journey, I totally resonate with, and me and Rebecca talk always, I'm like, Rebecca, is there anything I could be doing differently? Give me some feedback, because I don't pretend to know everything. I don't know what I don't know. And if people don't give feedback to me in a way that's kind and clear, then I can't really kind of progress. So how open are you with your team in terms of saying, hey, could I be clearer? Is there anything I'm not sharing with you? Is there any feedback, or vice versa? What do you need from me that's going to help you achieve your goals?
Yeah. So again, still on that. I mean, my team is still new. We're recruiting new people, and I guess again, it's something that you have to keep playing, and it's not a one-off. You can't just do it the once or the team. I mean, like anybody, we have team meetings, we have regular. But I guess one of the things I'd like to do more of is the reverse mentoring. I mean, we talk about it again. It's a big thing, and the best experiences I've had is when I've had reverse mentoring, and I wish we did more of it. I mean, there's nothing stopping, I guess, in my role even doing that. But yeah, I think for me, I'd like to do more of that, because I think you just learn. It's like, okay, I'm not Gen Z, obviously. But yeah, going back to young people, just the way they troubleshoot at things and the way they solve problem. But then on the other hand, I don't want to talk about young people. There is a big issue, again, something that I'm quite concerned about. You see a lot of women in their 50s, for example, a lot of discrimination that just gets, I'm in my 50s. And I don't know, people say, oh, you can't be that age, like something, they're looking at me thinking, and I think, well, that's another thing about being visible and being invisible. You're making these assumptions. So for me, that's also a concern about, particularly about women leaders in the workplaces. How do you bridge that gap, that there is a lot of learning to do with other peers that I have, but also there is the reverse mentoring side where you can have young people who are giving you that feedback. So I would like to set myself a challenge to do more of it, actually.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so part of Fem Mentored, which is a community I run alongside the day job. We've been exploring the concept around reverse mentoring. So particularly interested in charity boards who, by their very nature, are a certain demographic. There's gender biases still, because that is just the people who have the time, who can volunteer and also not be paid to do those roles. So as a trustee, I have loved the experience, but actually the concept of reverse mentoring for boards, particularly around digital AI technology, really helping bridge those divides between actually this is what's coming down the lines with a board, like how can we sort of provide access to mentoring as well. So yeah, interesting to sort of explore reverse mentoring as a concept, particularly in our industry and sector where digital and technology is just at a rate that is quite terrifying.
Absolutely. I think your sort of reflection on, you're always learning kind of really speaks to one of those conscious leadership pillars around, I hate the growth mindset, but are you open to reflection? Are you curious? Are you engaged, or are you just committed to being right? And that's sometimes that's a pathway that we have to sort of tread quite carefully as leaders, because sometimes there isn't the space to always kind of collaborate. But the self-reflection piece is, I think, the most important thing as a leader, and we forget how other people experience us. So it's only in those conversations through different levels, different people, that you're kind of getting an experience of yourself mirrored back to you. So yeah. Really like that approach. I guess coming back, what really strikes me, and there is a sort of an agility in a small team, and part of me is a little bit envious of of that. But what I really love is this sort of commitment to excellence, because when I sort of sit and I suspect we're quite similar in lots of ways, and I can be a bit sort of neurodiverse in terms of my thinking, and I'm here, there, everywhere, and sometimes I'm 4 days ahead of everyone else or in a different room, and I think that can be disorienting for the team. And so I'm sort of curious about how do you show up in an authentic way that means that you're not forcing too much of a part of yourself that's not natural to your team, in a way that they can work with you, and that you're sort of in this sort of like really productive kind of collaborative ecosystem. You're still ultimately accountable for the success. And I wonder if it's that thread of excellence that it comes back to.
Excellence is a good word. So one of the things, again, as I've said, I've changed sectors, and I kind of think I've done not a bit of everything, but got really good insight from a lot of roles. And I think one that's still, for me, frustrating with the charity sector, and maybe it's a perception out there, and I know a lot of people probably hate me for saying this, but I think you still have to almost have that mindset like a business, is that pursuit of excellence. It's not enough to just put a strategy out there that's a bunch of words, or a DEI policy, it's a bunch of words. You have to really live it. So I think clarity, and I've learned it myself. So when I have my team, and like, the example you gave, Rebecca, about, yes, your mind is racing, and the team say, oh, we've got 101 things to do. What do we do? I think it's clarity. So I always take it back to, again, being very clear. I would say break it down, be very simple. If you could make a difference, what's the single thing that will make a difference? And then the other things you park. Yes, we can do all the other programs. I mean, we have a pot of funding. We want to reach 2,000 people or whatever. I don't like numbers because, again, I don't think you see all these charity reports all the time. Like, oh, we've reached 5,000 girls. For me, it's not about numbers. It's about impact. It's about clarity of mission. So I think if you can make it super simple for people to understand and how each member of the team can contribute to that, that does help. Now, my team aren't here, so they might say something the opposite, but I always try to sort of help them and empower them to say, look, just make it simple and just strip away the noise. And then from that gives you clarity.
Yeah. And sort of permission to, we only need to focus on this. Let's do 3 things really well and 10 things that are sort of half finished.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the same thing I would say to boards. You mentioned, Jack, there's a lot of pressure. I'm the one that does the board papers and board meetings, all the governance. And it's a huge weight and a responsibility, particularly in a small charity. I think big charities, they can absorb it. I'm often jealous now I've only worked in large institutions. So for me, it's been a massive learning curve and think, oh, Sunday night, I've got to do the banking and go on to CAF Bank. It's just horrible. I've got no one to... So I'm screaming out into the void, trying to get payments on. And people think, oh, your life at work must be so glamorous. I thought, no, actually a lot. Some of the time there is the weight of responsibility. And I do feel that, in particular with smaller charities, that the larger charities and CEOs don't absorb. And that's why self-care and understanding and being sensitive is really important. And I don't think everyone understands that.
Yeah. I'm going to put the self-care and your resources into a car park because I'd really like to come back to that. But one of the things that I think that you'll have some really good experience and perspective on, lots of this work, lots of future leaders, will find themselves in a position where they have to have difficult conversations or influence people who are not on board. And I imagine you've had many sort of challenging conversations and had to take people on a journey. What have you learned about how to be most effective in that space and how to not carry the cost or the impact of that in your system?
Yeah, difficult one that is. You asking really difficult questions.
Sorry, that's not intentional.
Really good to think about it. It's like being in a therapy session. That's again, every role and every interaction. I like to think my superpower, if I have one, is that ability to be collegiate and to work with people. And I will answer that question. I go back to one thing I didn't mention when I was looking at my career. Outside of my career, I spent a good 3 decades campaigning around violence against women. So, activist, campaigner, but really passionate about that. That's a tough gig to do for 3 decades. And also, my career has been punctuated by my career having to be, not having rather, but standing for a political seat.
Yeah.
So I've tried twice to be a member of parliament, and I've learned a lot through that process. So those roles give me a real, I suppose, insight and experience in terms of how I deal with the situation of how do you have difficult conversations? So not a work context, but very recent last year, I was having difficult conversations with people on the doorstep about why they should be going out to vote and and people, as you can see what's happening now, a lot of people are very, very angry. Yeah. And I have to say that when I stood for the local elections, the people that gave me the vote, I didn't get it. I came second place. I mean, Tower Hamlets Council was the only council in the country that's gone independent to one single mono-ethnic group of councillors. So that's a strange situation. But I came very close. But what was amazing for me, I found out that the people that voted for me weren't the people that I thought would vote for me.
Wow.
So because I could look at the demographics, and obviously I'd spoken to them. And I think going back to sort of, in career-wise and in a work situation, it's really important going back to listen, to respecting, and also to lead with integrity and authority. So when you take, there's proposals that I've taken to boards that are not always going to, to get support. But I think it's really believe in yourself, do your homework. And also you can, maybe this is a political thing, but it's really good to get people on board first and to try and, deal with some of the barriers that might come. And it sounds like I'm giving a management manual, but I really think getting people on board and doing the work by listening to people and trying to unpack their views is really critical.
Yeah. I mean, Rebecca, you talk a lot about the pre-landing the pre-land. Do not underestimate the level of stakeholder kind of consideration, but also we do a lot of similar sort of approaches around co-design, like bringing actually welcoming inclusive, diverse views, even if you don't agree, that is part of the process. You're going to get a better outcome, by opening up those conversations. And so I guess as a sort of leader, even if the outcome isn't what you kind of wanted it to be in terms of what you might deem successful, the journey to that sort of conversation, I assume, is still insightful. It's bringing you learnings, and it's still kind of developing you as a leader as well.
Yeah, and have conviction. I think you have to. If you don't believe in it, how are you going to persuade anyone else? And I think when you're trying to put solutions and proposals and get people, even if they don't agree with you, they can see that you've got that conviction. Yeah. And I think that resonates with people. And actually brings, you might not get, I've had examples where people haven't necessarily agreed with you the first time, but then they've come back and circled back and said, oh, actually, Afsana, you did say that. And now I've come, not necessarily to your total view of thinking, but you make those connections with people and people remember that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, what you're talking about sort of speaks to the power of just holding space, so listening and holding space for, okay, you think and believe this, I think and believe this. There is this sort of outcome that we're probably both striving to that is probably more similar than maybe. So let's keep asking why or how might we. And I think, all of the sort of boardroom kind of car crashes that I have witnessed or people talk about, I think is always an absence of having done that period of listening, like this, don't, sometimes there's a deadline and sometimes you have to meet it, but sometimes somebody will just say a date and it will be, well, that's the date that's driving, and it's meaningless. Better to have better quality engagement beforehand, all flow through, what's that expression, more haste, less speed or something, but go slowly to move fast. If you've got to take a group of stakeholders who aren't on board with you, you have to do the legwork.
Yeah, people feel, but it's human nature. People feel better if they feel they've been included and listened to. That's, you don't need a management manual to teach you that.
Yeah. And some of that is also being clear on what that involvement is. So it could be contribution, it might not be decision making. And again, just being really clear with people around how they are contributing and at what's their role in that sort of journey as well. Like, you're a subject matter expert, we are inviting you in to kind of contribute. Actually, a decision is going to be made at this forum with these stakeholders because of X and Y. So again, just being really open with people as well around the expectation and what they think their level of contribution and involvement is.
Yeah,
as well.
Absolutely.
So trustees. So I'm in my 4th year as a trustee, and I'm just constantly what do you need? not that I have time to do anything more, but I will always kind of offer more. And I see part of my role, because I'm from a digital background, from fundraising as well, that's where I cut my teeth. So spend a lot of time with the exec director leading that space to kind of say, like, these are the challenges that might come up. This is what we're going to talk about in the committee. And I see that as a really important part of my role as a trustee, to set them up for success, but also challenge them. Like, is that your experience with sort of boards and trustees, like that level of support and kind of that relationship?
Yeah, so I can see it from both sides. I've been a trustee. I chaired a couple of housing associations. Again, a big weight of responsibility as a trustee. And I also have a board of all women. Yay. Really great, actually, trustees. The chair, who's actually my chair at the moment, is the founder of Sweaty Betty. So the foundation's very much her legacy and her vision. And she's an amazing person, has done a lot, doesn't ask for public recognition, and she's she's herself is an amazing person. I think with the board, and again, big issue in the charity sector, I think it's great to have healthy challenge and scrutiny. And I think people, Lou, you spoke about digital expertise, and I think that's where trustees, when you have an expertise, I love the fact that some of my trustees have expertise. Like we just recruited a young person who's got youth voice, and because we have a girls panel, and she's brilliant. She says, well, let's youth proof. She looks at things. She'll sit in the board meeting, and sometimes there's acronyms, and she'll say, oh, I don't understand it. I'm doing ChatGPT and trying to find out. So she keeps us real. So I think, it really, when you recruit trustees, I think, again, as a board governance, you get the usual. Of course you need finance, of course you need HR, of course you need legal. But I think if you are on a charity or a board that seeks to, for example, empower girls or empower young people, my question is, do you actually have young people's voices on those boards? And if you don't, why not? Or if you are, for a lot of these charities who are trying to support people, let's say in the domestic violence arena, for example, do you have people with lived experience, or are they just shunted to another body? So I think for me, my current situation is we very much have the situation that you have, Lou. There is a fine line. Sometimes when people get very excited, is what is the executive role and what is a trustee role. And sometimes that line can get blurred in terms of being operational, and in terms of being, you're a trustee, you oversee and you have oversight.
Nose in, hands out. That was kind of the analogy the chair recruited me on 4 years ago. It's like, absolutely, love that. So the charity sector, we've spoken a bit around like passion. So there's a huge amount of motivated individuals who enter the sector for lots of different reasons. But, a lot of that is tied to the mission and wanting to kind of be part of that, which can sometimes, and we've discussed this on another podcast with another leader of a charity, around sometimes that sort of creates a culture of expectation of involvement in what the organisation is and isn't going to do. And I think right now it's fair to say there's some really tough decisions that need to be made in the sector. And so I wondered, sort of any advice that you might have for, CEOs who are sort of, and maybe their background is just the not-for-profit sector, trying to ride this wave of challenges. How do you sort of maintain the integrity of the mission, but also make those tough decisions knowing that this organisation needs to still be here in 10 years' time?
Yeah, it's a lot of weight and responsibility. People feel heavy, don't they? Heavy with the weight. So I guess my advice and tip is, going back to that self-care, I've felt it sometimes. There's, I've had sleepless nights and it's affected my health. And then I think, why am I doing this? And it's because I care. And I think there are a lot of people that care, but it goes back to, you have to be better at setting boundaries. So my number one thing is, yes, you have got a responsibility and you want the charity to last, but you also want to last for the next 10 years, because if you're not well and healthy in mind and outlook, then you can't do the job. So I think, because it's often, if you asked me this question a few years back, I'd have said, bum, 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 we need to do this, we need to do this. But now I've learnt myself and slipped into bad habits that it is actually because you are this. Everyone's looking to you. Everyone's looking to you. The team looks to you. The board looks to you. You know, the girls are looking to you. It's a lot of responsibility, and that weighs heavy. So you have to make that burden and weight light. Is my. And then I think I go back to the pursuance of excellence. Something again that I've learned on my own career path is that passion is not enough. And there are loads of people that are passionate about working in charity and want to care. But I have found that the skill set, that's not sufficient. If you want the charity to be there, and sometimes I know I've said that message and it hasn't landed well, you know, because people have felt sometimes, it's all high level and strategic and I'm doing the best that I can. And I'm sure they are. But I think if you work for the charity sector, you're doing it for a purpose. So given what I've said about boundaries, it's also about that pursuit of excellence. You know, how do you make that pot stretch? What can you do to save? It's not all, that's a collective responsibility. And sometimes I feel like for a lot of leaders, I felt that myself, like when the figures don't add up, I'm thinking, okay, what do I need to do? But then I check back on myself, is it, why is it all on me? And I feel that burden. And I think a lot of people do. And, and that's where you do need to probably reach out to people and not be afraid to say that you're, experiencing.
Yes, I think what you're also describing, and it's interesting in your current organisation where it's all women, that then of course it's a given that it would default to you. But I think in organisations where there is a sort of a higher sort of different kind of gender mix, and I guess let's be frank, most businesses are run mainly by men with some women at the helm. And there's a double load, I think, for female leaders in that space where you have to do your job and you have to deliver the numbers, but also somehow you're held more accountable for culture. You're held more accountable for, making it a nice space, being the, like unofficial kind of counsellor or pastoral, like head of pastoral care, by just definition of your sort of your gender. And I think that I think, women take duty, like it's kind of in our sort of system. Duty and service is in our DNA. It's been really a big part of our story, and I think it's very hard for women to I really like your expression, sound your boundaries, because I think we can all sit here and say, okay, well, yeah, I definitely know I shouldn't do this, but lots of us really struggle with saying no, or not today. What have you learned to let go of, and how have you, what's your advice to women based on your experience in terms of managing that load? Because it does exist.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I haven't found a solution to that yet. No surprise. I failed. So yeah, not the best role model in that. I'm quite not manic as a person. So I'm glad you asked me that question, because one of the things, going back to my current role at the foundation, which is all about movement and the joy of movement, I have found, and it's so important, that, your well-being, like be physically active, is just, if there's one tip that I could give. Yep. I mean, there is that statistic out there, isn't there, that most CEOs and leaders have got fitness as core to their success and being, and that is just so true. Again, growing up as I said, in a South Asian Muslim household, the emphasis, and still is in a lot of places, is very much on academic, outcomes. Everybody in my family is, people have degrees and they're doctors and lawyers and things. So there's a lot of pressure, and I had that pressure as well. It's only in later life that I realised, and I had a personal tragedy about 10 years ago. And actually, it's running that saved my life. Running kept me going into the mental sort of health abyss. So I think it's really, if there's one advice I can give, is find the joy in some form of movement, whether it's listening to music. And, there was a meme, I don't like watching Instagram, and I don't. But there was one meme I'm sure you've seen, which says, if you're gone tomorrow, or if you lose your job, then you're replaceable. And it's not an uplifting message to say to someone, but again, checking back in myself. That is so true. In a world where we hold multiple roles, we have family, we have friends to care for, we have workplace colleagues. You have to, your own self, be fit for purpose. So that for me is the big tip, is just, build time for yourself. I box, I do visualization. I get home and I get to the gym, I do my Pilates and yoga, I try and box and I visualize my problem. So that's probably where my wacky solutions come from, right? So I find that gives and that releases the endorphins and helps me. And when I don't do that, that's when I start feeling really on a downward, it can get me on a downward spiral. And so you have to lift yourself back up.
Yeah. And I think we spoke about sort of leaders like sort of feeling the pressure, but like still you need to build that sense of community and network. And that can be in the workplace, it can be outside, but kind of knowing that as a leader, like also not being afraid to ask for help or look for advice and inspiration. And that's, I guess, been a big part of why we've wanted to even embark on this podcast, is can we just all be real about how hard it can be, but also the light, the inspiration, the joy. You mentioned Taylor Swift. You've got to find the joy where you can, and, make sure that the legacy you leave behind, of course, was that CV, but that's not really the eulogy, right? That people are reading out. It's the impact that you've had on the people, the communities, the girls that have been part of the work that you've done, not the job title that you had.
Exactly.
In terms of like the legacy you'd like to leave behind then, so if you think about your leadership career, like what would you love people to have taken away as they've been in contact with you over your journey?
Oh, such a great, beautiful question. Legacy is a good word, because I always put, even, I know it sounds a bit cliche on the CV, you put legacy, but I do put that on because I am proud. I'm proud of the fact that when I started in the 90s, we were the first borough to do the Race Hate Crime Task Force. That's actually more needed now than ever. I'm proud of the fact that when I was at the civil service, my proudest moment, I said to my children, was when Gordon Brown stood in Parliament and read out pre-budget report, which has, contained our programme to alleviate child poverty. And I'm proud of the fact that the current campaign we've got to transform the school changing rooms for girls will hopefully leave a generation of girls and women who don't suffer PE trauma. And I think, that's me personally, but I like to think that I can stand by those and have made a difference. I mean, people may not remember my name. That's not the important thing. But if you know that you've made a difference, a positive difference to alleviating an issue, whether it's poverty or well-being, then I will bank that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of what you've shared with us. And I've had some conversations with younger women recently, and I think what I find like a bit upsetting as a woman also in her 50s, having learnt the lessons, is that there are still women going out into the workplace being driven by internal narratives that perhaps may have been sort of trauma-informed, or stories that they've told themselves and other people. And you see that play out. And, I keep saying to them, the body keeps a score. Like, it absolutely will show up for you.
Yes.
You need to find balance. Like, because I see myself in the when I laugh, because a bit like, yes, we see it in each other as well. But absolutely keep moving. And I think sort of my closing question is there anyone that you would like to honour as part of your leadership journey, or a part of you that you would really give thanks to, that that's enabled you to sort of sit here, or left something like a chunk of kind of goodness in your system that you'll be sort of forever grateful for?
Gosh, that's I was not expecting that. That's a curveball. Who would I? I'm going to honour my mother. she went through such a difficult time, which I didn't appreciate. And I know we're sitting here and it's all sisterhood and women, but I think, honouring our mothers and our parents and what they do for us, it sounds, again, not so cliche, but my mother experienced so much trauma in her life. And I remember growing up as a teenager and not being very nice to her on so many occasions. And I think, my mother passed away a few years back, but I just think, who shapes us? Who makes us? It, for some, it may not be parents, but certainly in my case, if I could say something, I'd say to my mum, you made me.
Oh,
Yeah, really powerful. Thank you.
Dedicate this to your mum. What was her name?
Latifa.
Oh,
yeah. Thank you. That's great. And thank you for making this such a welcoming and open space. I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you
and
for
I'm sorry
coming.
that we can't carry on talking for another hour. Apparently, we're at time.